In the first episode of our Getting Started with RailClone course, we looked at how to use existing RailClone presets. But after a while, you're going to want to create your own custom objects. Before you start creating things completely from scratch, it can be really helpful to adapt and reverse engineer the built-in styles. Using the existing presets as a springboard for your own designs is not only a great way to learn, it can save you time as a lot of the work may already have been done. First of all, it's good to get an idea of how RailClone works. Then the graphs that you see used in the preset should make a lot more sense and be easier to read and adapt. To illustrate, I'm going to add and deconstruct a curtain wall from the library to the ground floor of the central building. I'll create a new RailClone object and then go to the Architecture, Exterior, Facade category and go to Curtain Wall. I'm going to load Curtain Wall 06. Next, we're going to go to the Base Objects rollout and assign the path, just like we did in the last lesson. Now, as we can see, immediately there's an issue because the height between the floors in our building is actually taller than our current style. So how do we make this a little bit taller? Well, the way that you do that is to extract and instance the geometry out of this RailClone object and then edit it using Max's standard tools. To do that, we open the Style Editor using the button in the Style rollout. This opens our graph view, which is basically RailClone's brain, and it's how you'll create and edit all of your parametric objects. Before we make any changes, let's take a look at the categories of nodes that RailClone uses so that you can start to understand how these styles are built. RailClone is genuinely easy to learn once you understand three basic principles. First of all, as we've seen, RailClone doesn't construct an object fully programmatically. It actually works using a path to assemble and repeat existing modular pieces of geometry. And to do that, it needs to import scene objects into the graph. We call any node that imports geometry from the scene a base object. And in this style, there are two. There's a spline that defines the path, and of course some geometry nodes, which in RailClone terminology we call segments. Then secondly, the way the geometry is assembled along the path is defined with a set of rules, and these are created using something we call a generator. And then thirdly and finally, just like Max, RailClone has its own sort of set of modifiers which we call operators. These are used to manipulate geometry. You can do things like switch between items, mirror geometry so you can reuse it, you can manipulate UVWs, randomize material IDs, and even create sequences, randomize geometry and create patterns along the spline, and much more. Divided between these three categories, there are actually in fact only 21 nodes, and a parametric object can be as simple as just 2 nodes. But don't be deceived, this handful of options belies the enormous power of RailClone to create nearly any object that features repeating geometry. So now that we've got a grounding, let's look at editing the geometry. If you click on the segment node, you'll notice that there's no reference to an object in the scene. And that's because, as you can read here, the geometry is embedded. RailClone, unlike Forest Pack, doesn't need the geometry to remain in the scene. If you delete the source geometry, in fact, a copy is simply stored internally inside the RailClone object. And all the built-in presets will import this way. But here's the thing, you can easily restore the geometry back into the scene and edit it. So there are two ways of doing this. You can either click this button here to extract the geometry just from the selected segment, basically one at a time. Alternatively, if you go to the segment drop-down menu, you'll find an option to extract all of the segments in the graph in one click. Whichever you choose, a live link is maintained between the geometry and the RailClone object. So I can easily add an edit poly modifier on top of these objects, and then I can change the size by just grabbing some vertices and moving them up on the Z-axis to change the height. You can easily also change the proportions of the panels by just moving their vertices, and in this particular style, I can even tweak the pivots to move the facade to more accurately match my floor plates. So we've taken an existing library style and modified it slightly, and that's usually the first step for people learning RailClone. The next step then is to use the built-in presets as a springboard to create your own unique styles. You'd normally start by something in the library that's got a similar structure, but then instead of extracting and tweaking the geometry, we're just going to replace it with our own. So when you're replacing it, you need to understand what each segment contributes to the graph. And you can do this by toggling it on and off using the X button in the top right-hand corner. For example, we can see by turning it on and off that this segment is the corner. Toggling this one on and off, we can see that it's spaced at regular intervals along the spline, and this one fills in between. This means that in order to reuse this graph, we need 3 new pieces of geometry, which I've already prepared here and are in the downloadables test scene. So first, let's add the corners. Simply select the segment node, click the Object Picker button, and then select the substitute geometry from the scene. Next, do the same thing for the evenly spaced inputs. And then finally, for the geometry that fills in between. So that's basically done, but you might find due to differences in size and other factors, there are further edits you need to change the actual rules themselves. So each one of these parts that make up this array have a set of rules that govern their behaviour, and you'll find these in the generator settings. In this short intro, we're going to keep it simple and just demonstrate by going to the Rules tab and finding the Evenly section. This section controls the behaviour of the geometry that's spaced at regular intervals along the spline. This setting, called Distance, changes that spacing. I'm going to increase it slightly. If you're ever looking for settings that change the rules for how a particular input is assembled along the array, you'll find them in this Rules tab. There are different rules for default segments, corners, evenly placed segments and markers. We'll talk more about each of those in the next lesson, but for now we're keeping it simple and finishing this style. In this lesson, we've taken a library preset and customised it in 2 ways. First of all, by editing the existing geometry, and secondly, by completely replacing the segments with our own geometry to create something new. In the next section, we'll learn all about the L1S generator and start creating new styles from scratch.